Hello everyone and welcome to another webinar from Linkhouse. Today our very special guest is Matt Singers. Hello Matt, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I think Matt is mute.
Hello Thomas, it is fantastic to be here.
So before we start, Matt, I've prepared a few words about you. So tell me if everything is correct. Matt Singers is a management coach, consultant and speaker, especially for SEO companies. He has coached people in everything from large organizations such as Shell and Coca-Cola to small online entrepreneurs for more than 12 years. Host of SEO Mastery Summit in Saigon, which is amazing conference. SEO Management Coach, work with Ahrefs, Matt Diggity and other big players. Is everything correct, Matt?
I hope so.
Okay. So before we go further, before we start, I have two more announcements. On 6th of November, we are sending the first edition of our I Hate SEO newsletter. You can sign up now. I ensure that we won't spam you. We are preparing SEO breaking news, case studies, tests, promotions, and the best memes for our subscribers. So ihateseo.com. You can register there, and the link is in the chat as well. And the second announcement, you definitely should subscribe to our YouTube channel. Many exciting interviews and webinars will be published there soon. But a few really interesting conversation and webinars are already on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check those out. And yeah, getting to the point, we've prepared about 20, maybe 28, 27 questions. We'll see how it goes, but I hope that you are patient man, Mats. So to our viewers, of course, we'll do a Q&A afterwards, so you can ask questions in the chat. So can we start with the question, Mats? Are we ready?
I am born ready.
Okay. So let's start with the quite general question. You describe yourself sometimes as SEO management coach. This is quite unique title. What does it exactly mean from your point of view, maybe?
Yeah, my focus generally have been around people management, right? So I used to work in big companies like Coca-Cola and Xerox, IBM, and yeah, my focus is very much on management. It's the people management side of things, and that's my sort of passion, if you will. When I bumped into the SEO field many years ago, built my first affiliate website in 2007. One of the things I realized was that many SEOs are not good when it comes to people management. And yeah, that was one of my strengths. And I figured out that one of the simplest way for me to help a lot of people was really helping enable SEOs to become better people managers and better leaders. Reality is, for a lot of people, leadership is scary, but most things are scary if you don't know what they are. So my sort of passion is really upskilling and giving SEOs the tools to become great managers. And fundamentally, this is a skill that's often quite different from SEO, but it's not necessarily so hard to learn. So most of the people I work with typically go through a sort of 2-day training with me, and that's often enough to sort of change the mindset and really get people significantly upskilled on the people management side of things. Obviously, there's some implementation after that, but the biggest thing is that just like the first time you hear about SEO, it sounds big and scary, and it's very hard to know what to do with SEO when you've heard about it for 2 days. And the biggest challenge for most SEOs is they've often spent very little time learning about business and learning about management. So the whole point is that if you start from scratch, it's a big step. But the whole point is that, many SEOs, they're trying to like find one tip or improve slightly on SEO. And, if you improve your SEO skills by 1%, at that same time, you could probably improve your business or your management skills at 20, 30, 40%. So there's a lot that can be done to really grow and improve yourself that will have a significant impact on your overall results and the amount of money you can make and so on. And that is my curse and that is my passion. So very much helping people get the most out of their stuff.
Okay, so I have one non-script question about it because it's really interesting. So do you see any kind of difficulties in training an SEO specialist for, I don't know, manager? Are there any typical personality traits in the SEO world that you encounter most often?
No, so what I would say is anyone can learn how to manage. There's this good misconception that people are born to lead, or some people are natural born leaders, and there's certain traits that people look at as being natural born leaders, but anyone I work with have things to learn, right? So it doesn't matter. Like a lot of time people look at very assertive, very outgoing people and they say, oh, that's a natural leader. But honestly, no matter what your personality is, no matter what your strength is, there's things to learn, right? We all have to learn something to become a good leader, and there's no exceptions to that. The things people need to learn is maybe different, but everyone have something to learn. And then reality is leading is not easy. But then again, becoming a world-class SEO is not easy either, right? It all takes work. But yeah.
Okay. So do you think that someone who manages, some SEO specialists have to be SEO specialist by himself?
No, not necessarily. So the key thing is, and this is often a mistake that happens a lot in entrepreneurs and sort of small companies, is people think they need to learn how to do things and then train someone else how to do it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who teach that concept, but that's a very poor concept. I can promise you the CEO of IBM is not sitting figuring out what 200,000 people should be doing and telling them what to do. That is just not how the world works. And when you do that as a business owner, the only thing you're doing is you're inhibiting the growth of your company. So the thing is, when you're trying to figure everything out by yourself, you are the bottleneck. You are the bottleneck of growth. You're the bottleneck of marketing. You're the bottleneck of operations. And one, it makes you crazy busy, as in you work 24/7. Your company doesn't grow very fast, and it's the fastest way to slow down your own growth is trying to figure out everything by yourself and then teach other people how to do it.
Okay, so let's move on to the second scripted question. So in the world of SEO, including conference and events, content produced in journals and blogs, what we focus on primarily is technicalities: how to get to the top of the search, how to improve conversion in the funnel, how to optimize costs or PPC campaigns, and so on. But there is very little attention paid to the running the business. So do you reckon this is a problem?
Well, it's not a problem if you don't like money, right? So if you don't like making money, that's a great way to go about it. But if you actually want to make money, like the big thing is the best SEOs rarely make a lot of money, right? And that's a reality.
Yeah.
Often, even when you go to an SEO conference, the people who know the most about SEO is not the people who make the most money. It's the people who take action. It's the people who make things happen. It's the people who focus on moving things forward instead of doing everything by the book, instead of following every process. And I have gone in and worked with many agencies, right? And sometimes they show me a 200-step checklist every time they onboard a new client. And they're checking all these minute things that doesn't really matter. And the whole thing is, if you're spending time every time you onboard a client checking or doing 200 different things, either you don't know SEO very well, meaning you don't know what are the 10 things that actually move the needle, what are the 10 things that it makes sense to do, or otherwise you're just spending a ton of resources and time on doing things that have potentially, or in most cases, a tiny impact, right? And this is the thing about business. Business is fundamentally 80-20, right? It's like, how can you do something that have a significant impact so that when you spend time doing it, it's actually worthwhile doing, right? That is the concept of business, really.
Okay, so how do you go from being an SEO to from an SEO to CEO?
The fundamental trick, if you will, is focus more on the business. And that means that there's a bunch of steps to it, but I would say one of the core things is definitely around delegation, right? So delegation is where so many people struggle because they keep holding on to things. They keep delegating tasks instead of delegating ownerships to their staff. So they keep telling people, oh, I need you to do this thing. I need you to do this thing. I need you to do this thing. Instead of saying, hey, Thomas, you're great at link building. I want you to own link building. I want you to be responsible for it. And what you need to deliver is we need 20 links a month, or we need 40 links a month, or we need 50 links a month. But giving you an area of responsibility and be exceptionally clear on what is the output we need, and then let you get on with it. Instead of sitting and micromanaging you and looking at everything you're doing, you need to learn to give people ownership, give people the responsibility, and make it very clear what output you're looking for. Reality is anyone that is halfway successful in SEO, the way they've gotten to where they are is because at some point someone trusted them. So that means at some point, someone, that could have been a client if they never had a real job, or it could have been a boss saying, hey, we need to figure out how to get traffic to our website. Can you look at it? Or it could be a client saying, hey, I have some money. Can you help me get traffic? But at some point, someone trusted you and gave you some ownership, gave you some responsibility, and said, hey, I have a problem. Can you figure it out? And you figured it out. And the problem is when you're handing people tasks all the time and micromanaging them, what you're not doing is you're not enabling other people to grow the way you've grown. Not a single SEO have ever come out of someone being handed a pile of 100 processes and someone saying, do this stuff, right? Like that's not how you develop great people.
Okay, interesting. So how long does the transition take? I imagine that this is ongoing process that never really ends, but more or less, how much time does one needs to become?
It depends a lot on the situation, where you are, how big your company is, how good the people around you are. I would say for people I work with, it's typically somewhere between 3 to 9 months. So it's obviously the first step is understanding. So the first step is understanding, hey, what am I doing versus what should I be doing? And then the second step is changing behavior. But the thing is, most people coming to me all say the same thing. I just want to do SEO. I don't want to manage people. And then, we go through the training and they're like, hey, this is pretty smart. I can actually get stuff done without having to do it myself. That's interesting. And I mean, yeah, some of the best people I work with, someone like Matt Diggity and some of these guys, like they've all come with the same mindset initially, but as soon as they learn how to manage, you don't want to do it yourself anymore. I mean, there's nothing exciting about writing meta descriptions or updating anchor text on 700 different internal links, and it's not exciting. And the biggest problem is it's not the most valuable thing you could be doing with your time. So when you're sitting doing things that someone getting paid significantly less than you could be doing, you're wasting company resources and you're hindering the growth and development of your business.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning and the question of character traits. What are the common problems you see with SEOs running a business in general?
Yeah, so there's two types of SEOs that you'll generally see around. There's the nerdy, very introvert, very detail-oriented people. And those are typically let's call them, for lack of a better word, the best SEOs in the terms of they know the most. Again, from a success criteria, they're maybe not the most successful, but they typically have the highest level of knowledge. Now, these people, their biggest challenge is often taking action. So the whole IM industry really exists because they exist. So these are the people who buy course after course after course, learn a ton of stuff, put a ton of stuff in their head, and then they never really take very much action. Or the action they take is very, very slow, and is very delayed, right? So it takes them a very long time to do something, and when they do something, it goes very, very slow moving forward. So they're perfectionists. The second type of SEOs, which is typically the one that tend to be more successful, is people who are still quite focused on tasks. They're quite logical, but they're very driven by action, right? So they're constantly focused on, what can I do right now to move a step forward? What can I do right now to move a step forward? What is the next thing I can do to take the next step? And those people tend to be more successful, and they're generally very comfortable failing. They don't mind trying 100 things and failing. Whereas the first category of people, they're kind of a little bit afraid of failing. They're afraid of looking stupid, if you will. But their core focus is not making mistakes. Whereas people who are willing to fail, people who are focused on, how do I take the next step? Not just necessarily how do I become a millionaire overnight, but how do I make $10? How do I make $100? How do I make 1,000? How do I make 10,000? Right? Like, people who really move forward, they tend to be the ones that succeed the most. So those are the two kinds of people. That the people that struggle the most is definitely the detail-oriented people, right? They know a lot of stuff, and honestly, often they benefit more from either collaborating with someone who's more driven than they are, or even working for someone else. Because often what happens is, when they're responsible to deliver things to someone else, they don't want to let other people down. So they're very good at delivering when someone is sitting hitting them in their head. But when they're responsible to themselves, if you will, they often really procrastinate. They often don't move forward. They're often, as soon as they get, they might have a little growth and they might grow a little bit, but then as soon as they get to a level of comfort, their growth stagnates big time, because their motivation, they don't have a motivation to make millions. They logically want to make millions, but they don't want to do what it takes, right? So they don't have the driver to keep pushing and actually really implementing the stuff they already know how to do.
Okay, so besides the lack of making the next steps, the interesting thing that I wanted to ask is, does the SEO's ego sometimes become a problem? What do you think about that?
It's often, honestly, it's not just about ego. It tends to be more about detail-oriented people want to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And some people want to be right, some people want to be effective. And I can promise you, being right is not going to help you very much in life. Like, you can sit down and say, oh, this guy said something, it's wrong. Ha ha ha, I'm so smart. And I'm like, great, you're smart. But the guy who is wrong makes a lot more money than you. So, who's the smart guy here, right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing in life is, whenever you feel you're in a situation where you think you're being smart, think about, like, take a step back and say, hey, am I being smart? Or am I proving how smart I am and basically being ineffective, and not focusing on what is the outcome, but instead looking at, how can I prove how smart I am? And when you look at, Facebook groups is one of the best places. Like, someone asks, like, oh, what is the most important aspect of SEO? And someone says links, and someone says content. And then there's a billion people who want to put in exactly how they look at the world, and so on, right? Which, they get into all these stupid arguments, which is just arguments for people trying to prove how smart they are, but none of them is winning, right? Like, they're all just wasting time.
Okay, so yeah, this is true that only the effects of actions show how smart really I am. So yeah, it's true. It's pretty common thing.
Like here's the thing: knowing something and not using it, or not taking action with it, you might as well not know it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's scale back. What would you say to those who are just starting their freelance business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to look at, right? The first thing is understanding that business is often about simplification. There's a lot of people out there who try and make business very difficult. So there's a lot of agencies who do SEO and e-commerce, and they do like a whole pile of services, and they have 5 people, right? Don't do that. So my philosophy is very simple. As a company, you want to figure out what is your process. What is the one thing you do exceptionally well that is valuable to other people? And the more you do it, the better you get at it. If you look at the biggest companies around, if you look at Coca-Cola, if you look at McDonald's, like they're not out there providing 17 different services. The problem for most people when they start out, they're desperate for money. So they do like this. They're like, anyone that have any kind of SEO problem, come to me because I'm an SEO. And then they work on a whole bunch of different stuff, never really become exceptionally good at anything. And they deal with a whole bunch of clients that they can't really hire people to help them out with, because these clients all have different problems. They don't have a clear process. They don't have a clear sort of value they're providing and so on. So the core thing is, when you're first starting out, figure out one thing you do exceptionally well, right? And when you look in the world of SEO, when you look at some of the successful companies, there's people who build companies just doing citations exceptionally well. There's people who do just guest posting exceptionally well. And those companies that focus on one thing often grow way more than, not often, 95% of the time, grow way more than these businesses who's trying to be everything to everyone. Because business success is about simplification, right? Like, you guys, you're not trying to cover the whole world. You're saying, hey, we're Links guys. Here's what we do. It's very simple. Here's how you buy our stuff. And you know, you're not over complicating it. You're not trying to sell links. You're not trying to sell businesses. You're not trying to sell 27 different things. You know what you're selling. You have a core product, and it makes it so much easier when you do branding as well. The problem is most SEOs, they're like, oh, I can't find any leads. And it's often because we do SEO like everyone else on the planet. Like, everyone gets 700 spam mails every day from people doing SEO, so you're no different. Whereas if you really niche down, if you really pick a niche and you say, okay, I don't know, our strength is optimizing product categories on Shopify sites, right? Then people know exactly what you're doing. If all of your content, all of your social media is about that topic, and people have that problem, they will come to you because you're the only person who is focused on just that, right? And that is the essence for me of sort of starting out in business. Even if you're a freelancer, like, really try and niche down and focus on something, ideally something you're good at. But the whole point is, if you do one thing over and over and over again, you become really, really good at it. And that's the whole thing. When you become really good at something, you provide more value in the same amount of time. And okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So to sum it up, choose your narrow niche well, specialize in it, and go all in. As you said, the niching down is a key. So how do you pick a niche?
Honestly, there isn't really a right or wrong way. Well, what I would say, a few things that we think about for most of the companies I own, right, is one, does your company, does your potential customers have money? Selling to people with no money is often not the best move, right? So number one, does your audience have money, right? So when you look at SEO, a lot of successful people tend to end up in stuff like gambling, real estate, finance, some of the sort of crypto stuff and whatever. But essentially, even if you look at local SEO, people, the most successful people tend to end up where people have money, which is often in like roofing and some of the more expensive services, right? If you're doing SEO for hair salons, like, you can make some money, but don't expect to charge each hair salon $5,000 a month, right? Because they don't have that level of money. So, you know, pick customers, or at least that's my suggestion, is pick some kind of odd niche. Often the more boring, the better, but pick people who have some kind of money to work with, right?
Yeah, that seems to be easy, but I think that's not that easy, as you saying it. But okay, let's move on. So maybe can you give some SEO specific examples of
niches?
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, so a good friend of mine, at one point, he started working with dentists, and he spent a long time building one website. I think they spent 6, 7, 8, 9 months maybe building one website. They optimized it to death, right? They really went into detail, did CTR, did all of the stuff, really made the perfect dentist website. And then he was like, great, from now on, we only work with dentists. We only work with dentists who use our website. So if they have their own website already, they can only work with us if they agree to use our template, right? And what he did was, normally every time they had a new customer, they spend a month building a new website and optimizing it and so on, right? But he spent a lot of time figuring out what works in the dentist niche. And then he literally just copy pasted the same site. They had a content description for each page. So they did get some unique content for every page, but it was the same content descriptions. But the whole point was he had already tested out a theme. He had already figured out where should the buttons be and so on, right? So they did change. Obviously, they had different logos. They added maybe slightly different coloring or whatever. But in the big scheme of things, instead of him spending $2,000-$3,000 for a developer to develop a site, he spent like $200 because he already had the right template. He said to customers, if you don't want to use our template, we don't work with you. That's how it is. And that meant that he could set up brand new sites for a couple $100. He knew they worked. He knew the keyword research was pretty much the same all over the country. And it was super, super easy. So what happened was he became an expert in the niche. He understood the niche very well. Because he understood the niche very well, when the customer got the site, it actually made money because it was already optimized. So instead of having to start from scratch every time, he just worked with one segment. And here's the thing, they were willing to pay more money because he delivered better results. So he paid way less money to deliver a service that people would pay way more money for.
Okay. So he knew that it was an offer that they couldn't refuse.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, again, this is the thing about when you specialize in things, when you do things over and over. Like, if you and me, if we've never done citations before and we go out and do it, it'll take us half an hour per citation, right? Because we suck at it. We're figuring things out and so on. So if you do things the first time, it takes time. But there's companies out there who does citation for like $1 a piece or lower than that, right? Because they have a system. They've done it 100 times. They know how to do it well. And I would never want to do. I would never waste $1. I'd never waste my own time instead of $1 sitting doing it myself, right?
Okay. That's interesting topic. But let's move on to another maybe. So the next question is that it happens sometimes that you have an excellent, technically skilled SEO team that starts bringing solid revenue. The demand rises, so you scale up and higher. But scaling fast can be, as we know, quite dangerous. So if you are new to running the business, what advice would you give to those facing such a tough challenge?
It actually goes back down to the previous point. So the problem is most people try and scale like this. They're like, okay, I know this stuff. Let me try and train one more like me. So they try and train someone else who had the same skills as they have. And it took them 5 years to learn it. So it'll take them 2 or 3 years to train someone like themselves. That's not the right way to do it. So businesses exist for the specialization of labor. And what that means is when you have a process, when you know exactly what you're delivering, you want to break that down into steps, right? And then you can hire people for each different step. So, for example, if you are, let's say the example of the guy doing content, doing website for dentists. Well, he have one developer who just focused on basically uploading a copy of the website and slightly adjusting it, right? He have one person who orders content, and when the content is finished, puts it on the site. He might have one person who do a little bit of link building or whatever, or buy some links or whatever the right strategy. So training each of those segments takes very, very little time, because when you're very good at something, you can break it down to small segments that make scaling really easy. Like, how difficult is it to teach someone to send like a content description to a content writer, get it returned back, and put it on a website. That ain't that hard. So the whole point is, when you break a process down, when you have a process in your business that you're working towards, and you break it down, each piece of that process becomes way easier to train people to do, which means you can train new people. If you suddenly need to grow, or if you're suddenly growing, you can train people way faster. If people are leaving, there's way less risk, because that it doesn't take so long to train a new person. And lastly, very often, if you grow, it very rarely happens that you start moving back in time, because you know your process, you deliver results. And if you found a marketing process that works, your growth usually keeps going one way. The area where people often have issues is because they don't have a clear process, they don't have a clear offer that they deliver. They basically do SEO, right? And they do SEO based on how much they can get out of the customer. So some customers, they're like, yeah, how much can you pay? Okay, $1,000. We'll do SEO for $1,000 a month for you. And this client, $3,000 a month. And this client, $1,500 a month, and whatever. And the problem is they have no system, they have no process. So they hire some people who know a little bit about SEO, and they say, hey, go and do SEO on these clients. And, there's no particular workflow. There's no, nothing happens, right? So it's exceptionally expensive to deliver a service that is often relatively mediocre. So they have no particular competitive advantage. They generally don't produce exceptional results. I mean, they might get some results. So hopefully they get some results and have some happy customers, but it's usually very not exceptional results. And it's usually not something that stands out big time, right?
Okay, so it's important to make a proper segmentation of the whole process, cut it into small pieces, and you find the specialists for every step of the whole process.
Yeah, in general. I mean, you want to break your workflow down, and then you can make different people responsible of different parts of the process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So tell me, Matt, how do you build, a great team? What beyond technical skills and knowledge would you advise hiring manager to look for?
Yeah. So for me, the key thing is that there's a big focus on skills that is not where it's supposed to be. And what I mean with that is that, honestly, again, if you're a proper business, if you break down a process, people generally don't need to know a ton of skills to be able to do a good job. The most important thing is finding people with a good mindset, a good attitude, who's wanting to do things, who's wanting to learn, who's wanting to do great work, and really put them into a system where you have a decent training for them, right? Too often people focus on the skills, and it's very interesting to see, because so often they're like, oh, I'll hire this guy, you've done link building for 2 years. And I'm like, what kind of link building have you done? And they actually start talking, and they're like, well, he was building comment links for 2 years. And I'm like, right, there's probably better people out there. Because reality is, specifically with something like SEO, when you hire someone that knows SEO, you often have to unteach their bad habits, because very few people look at SEO the same way. And if you as a company have a certain way of doing it, if you hire people who used to do things differently, sometimes it might be different better. But the problem is, if you want to be effective as a company, you want to execute a clear process. And if you have someone who is used to doing things completely different than you, it's often easier to train people from scratch on how you do it, rather than change the behavior of people who have existing ways and thoughts on how things should be done, right?
Okay, so to sum it up, isn't it better to sometimes look for someone, untainted by, bad behaviors, bad methods? And the second question, quite related, are, from your point of view, soft skills are more important to you than, knowledge and experience in some situations?
Definitely. I will take 10% better attitude over 80% skills. Now, obviously, if you're hiring a developer, they need to be able to develop. But I would rather have a lot less good developer with a great attitude than an amazing developer with a horrible attitude. If you've ever worked with people who don't have the right attitude, you don't want to be near them, right? Like, they're not good for your company. So skills, I mean, if you can hire someone with a great attitude, with amazing skills, fantastic. My experience is they're very, very expensive, and most, at least small companies, can't afford those people, right? So a lot of the time, if you have people with a ton of skills, you often have to, that they're often not available for very small rates, at least, right? So if they're very high skilled, you often need to pay a significant amount of money. Now, if you have a business with very high margins that are making a lot of money, you can often do some shortcuts in that direction, but you would still definitely want to make sure that they have the right mindset, the right attitude, the right cultural fit to your organization. That is one of the most important things.
Okay, the next one. I know I read somewhere that you are a fan of disk profiling. So can you explain those descriptions?
Yes, I can. Let me think about how to do it quickly. So basically, very, very briefly, there's if you take a square, right? You basically have four core personality types where everyone have a primary and a secondary, and they're always adjacent to each other. What that means is that when you look at a human being, it is relatively easy to assess and understand how does this person think. So you basically have right side of the brain versus left side of the brain, which, and you've probably heard it before, some people are left brains, which means they're way more logical than creative or emotional. And then you have people who are way more right brain, which is people who are more emotional and so on, then they're logical. And understanding behavior, it's relatively easy to figure out where people fit in. And with that, what that means specifically is that it's relatively easy to understand, like, just by someone looking at you doing this interview for 2 minutes will relatively easy be able to assess where you fit in from a personality standpoint, right? Now, I normally spend about 2.5 hours going through this with people, so I'm really trying to break it down in basic. But you have four sort of core personality. The first one is the dominant people, who are very, very driven, very, like, competitive, very, very, very goal oriented. Then you have the influential people that are fantastically sort of talkative. They will talk to anyone, anywhere. If they sit in a bus or a train, they will talk to anyone around them. And they're often the ones that people think of as typical salespeople. They never stop talking. Then you have steady people, which is the kind of the mom of the group, or the nice uncle, who are like, yeah, let's sit down in a circle and let's make sure everyone's okay, and let's just have a nice time, and let's not rush anything, and let's just take things the way they are. They're very sort of steady people. And then you have the conscientious people, which is typically the nerds, right? So the sort of very detail oriented, very perfectionist, very sort of often slow at learning people, right? So those are very high level, the core. What I can recommend, if you go to heyramp.com, you can actually go and do a free personality test, and people can do this on their own. So they can sign up for free and just do a personality test. You can do it both for yourself and your entire team. And if you do a test, it'll give you a lot more information about who are you and so on. And that's incredibly valuable. It's incredibly valuable both for you, but it can also be very interesting for you to get to know your team way better, right?
Okay. So according to what you said, do you use this method in hiring process? And if you do, how?
Yeah. So we use it extensively. So most of the time when I hire people, sometimes there's things you want in a recruit, and sometimes there's things you don't want. So for example, every time we hire people for a customer service role, we try and look for someone who either have influence or steadiness in them, because they're right brained, they're predominantly right brained, which means that they have a certain level of empathy that others might not have. And when you're doing, if you take yourself an example, one, you'd probably not enjoy doing a lot of customer service, and two, you probably wouldn't be super good at it. You'd be very good at telling people what they should do or how to fix the problem, but you probably wouldn't be great at explaining to them in a way that have a lot of empathy and they feel good about it and all this stuff, right? So yeah, so different roles, you want different things. Sometimes, a lot of time in SEO, some roles you probably want perfectionists. Some roles you maybe want to find people who just get shit done. Like when you're doing outreach, for example, you don't necessarily care if every single email is perfect and whatever. You probably just want to send a hell lot of emails and see what happens, right? Whereas if you're doing nitty-gritty on-page optimization, you might want to have someone who's a little bit more detail-oriented and, you know, don't screw up your anchor text or don't link to the wrong pages just to say they've done their job, right? So different roles kind of can benefit from different types of personality types, right? So yeah.
I definitely agree with that statement. And in my opinion, you know, the key for every manager is to find the right, you know, role for and position for every employee. And I have one question related to that, because I've seen a few times how people with, you know, big potential were put in the wrong role, and oftentimes those people struggle and you know, become ineffective, but at the same time they own self and esteem plunges. But the real issue is they are, you know, just in the wrong position or the wrong place. How do you manage to put people in the right places?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much goes back to what I said earlier, right? Like if I took someone like you and put you in a customer service role, you would not enjoy it, and the customers probably wouldn't enjoy it particularly much, right? So the whole thing is that, again, sometimes you have people in the company that have been put in the wrong role. And I always assess two things. I try and assess, is it the right person in the wrong role? Or is it the wrong person in the wrong role? Because sometimes the problem is, particularly when you have multiple managers in a company, sometimes someone have a problem employee that they want to get rid of. And often it's way easier to send them somewhere else in the company than having to actually do the work and probably fire them, right? So you want to make very clear if it's actually a great employee that's just in the wrong role, or if it's someone who is not a good fit and not delivering because they're not the right kind of employee for your business, right? So that's very, very important to understand. But yeah, fundamentally, when you have great people, again, if you have great people that you think are great that are not delivering, you could definitely get them to do a disc behavior test on Ahrefs, and you could see, you know, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and you can try and see, hey, maybe some of this stuff doesn't work really well, right? Maybe it doesn't connect well together. And you know, there's many situations, there's many combinations of why things would or wouldn't work, but fundamentally, you can go through that for sure. A lot of the time, if you have people who are not delivering based on what they're doing, and let's take some example in the world of SEO. Like some people, for example, are absolutely horrible at spreadsheets. When they look at a spreadsheet with 5 columns, they get dizzy, right? Now, if you give them some SEO task, which is often a lot of the time based on these spreadsheets full of data and information, and they're just, you know, they get dizzy from looking at their work, they're likely not going to succeed, right? So again, it's not just about moving them somewhere else, but it's trying to see what is the personality, what is part of what they're struggling with, and then if you are moving them elsewhere in the company, is seeing, do we actually have a real need for someone somewhere else that have different skill set, right? And then you could try that. But I definitely recommend spending some time getting to know DISC. Again, as I said, it's not a 5-minute thing, unfortunately. But yeah, it's super valuable, and it's one of the parts. Anyone that goes through my management training, it's always the first part of it, because both understanding yourself better is exceptionally valuable, but one of the biggest values from it is really understanding people who are very different from you. So a lot of time we have an easy time working with other people who think and behave like we do, because they communicate the same way, they think in a very similar way. But when you're dealing with people who are very different from you, then it's often harder. And you'll see in many companies, like sales and accounting or sales and IT can't connect. They can't communicate because they literally talk two different languages. And the problem is just it's different people in those different departments, right? So that's, yeah, it's critical. It's critical.
Yeah, but as you said, sometimes it's enough to remodel the whole way of working to extract efficiency from every employee. Like you said about the spreadsheets, and you can remodel the way of working. It could be the key to success. And question that I have also: have you often had to transfer people from one position to another, or that wasn't that common?
Mostly if I've taken over existing teams. So for example, when I worked in IBM, I would often go into a new team and I would have to make some changes. But when I'm recruiting or when we're recruiting, often not, right? Because again, if you put the right people in the right seat to begin with, you often have a lot less problems. So yeah, that often doesn't happen.
Okay, so tell me, Matt, whose responsibility is to realize one is in the wrong place?
The manager of the person who's managing them. So first of all, when people hire, and this is something entrepreneurs do sometimes, where they think they start hiring for the whole company. So the person who makes a hiring decision should be the person that the individual will report to. So if you're the CEO of the company and you have an operations manager, you shouldn't hire someone that works for the operations manager. The operations manager have to make that choice because they are the person who have to make them deliver, right? Now, if an operations manager, as example, hires someone who is not delivering, it is then their choice to make sure they go through the process and say, hey, this person isn't delivering, we have made a wrong hire. And then in most cases, it's a question of we made a wrong hire, we need to let them go. In a few cases, if it's a great hire, but just not the right fit in terms of the role, and you have other openings elsewhere in the company, you can sometimes, as I said, move people around. But reality is in most smaller companies, you might not always have other roles, right? You might not have the budget to have other roles sitting around, right? So it's not always an option. Yeah, again, if you get it half right to begin, you're definitely a lot further ahead for sure.
Okay, so let's stop for a while now. Quick reminder to our viewers. I encourage you to ask Matt's questions in the chat. After our webinar, as I said, we will move on to the Q&A. Don't forget about our I Hate SEO newsletter, ihateseo.com. And yeah, let's move on to the second part of the questions. Another problem I had is the lack of trust in decision making, in the sense that a boss gives you a task and knows you'll do it, but won't trust you to take greater responsibility. For example, by giving the whole projects or making lower level strategy decision. Isn't it a true stumble block for one's development?
It's definitely a stumble block. And this is why I said, as a manager, like, you want to give people ownership, you want to give people responsibility. That's critically important, right? Like, fundamentally, the most important piece is really making sure that if you are the employee, if you're not being given ownership and responsibility, you want to try and highlight that to your boss, right? You want to try and say, hey, I feel I can be trusted with this stuff. Tell me, what is the outcome you want? What are you trying to achieve? Because this is the problem. I see so many times where, like, again, let's take link building because it's simple. Someone says, oh, I want you to sit down every day and send out 100 emails. And I'm like, well, one, you don't learn anything and you never get better results. Because the problem is, if you just sit down, open the phone book and send 100 emails, that doesn't guarantee any results. But if you're sending out emails and if your goal is to build a certain number of links, you might start looking at, what are the emails we're sending? What do they say? How can we change them slightly? What can we do to improve this thing, right? And that for me is the essence, right? So it's really about, as a manager, it's about making sure that you give people the ownership. If you're in the situation as an individual where your manager is not giving you ownership, is do what you can to ask for it. So ask, what is the task, or what is the responsibility, and what is the outcome you desire? How can I help get you the outcome you desire, instead of just the first step in front of you? How can we get to the point where you're trying to get to, right?
Okay. So tell me, Mats, how to learn to delegate well? Any areas that SEOs struggle in particular in delegating compared to other groups?
Detail-oriented people are often the ones that struggle the most with delegation, mostly because one, they think in tasks, so they often by nature delegate tasks one by one, and that automatically just turn into micromanagement. In terms of learning it, I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of content online. Definitely part of my training course as well. So I have a big training course for anyone that want to be better at management, where we have a whole module for over an hour, just about delegation, right? So a lot of stuff to it. The first, I'd say, probably the most important mindset, as I said earlier, is understanding value. Like rule number one, if you're ever the bottleneck in your business, you're holding it back, right? So even if you give something to one of your staff members and they do a crap job, even a crap job, if you can go and do something totally different and do something more valuable, you might end up with more value at the end, right? Now, reality is most of the time people won't do a crap job. They might not do as good a job as you could have done. And as long as they do that, if they give 80-90% of the results you got, and that means that frees you up to do other things, that enables you to grow a bigger business, because it enables you to go and focus on the things that really matters and the things that are really valuable. And that is the essence of it, right?
Okay, so can you name the difference between management and leadership?
Honestly, I use them very intertwined. Um, for me, I mean, management is really, from a dictionary standpoint, is the art of managing people and ensuring work gets done, etc. Whereas leadership, being a leader, is typically more about taking ownership and being in front of the ship and being the first person to do something. I see the two of them being ultimately combined. Honestly, when I look at life, I look at it from a leader's perspective. So the thing is, for me, when you're learning leadership, when you're learning management, for me, you're not learning it for business, you're learning it for life, right? So how do you lead your family? How do you manage your family? How do you lead your local community? It's leadership and management for me is a mindset and so on, more than it's anything else. But I honestly, I don't spend much time trying to differentiate between them, because there's so much overlap, in my opinion.
Okay, so let me put it in this way. Does a manager have to be a leader, and should every leader be a manager in general?
Yeah, as I see it, yes. I mean, it's I see it as being very much the same thing. If you manage people, you also have to lead them, right? I mean, it's part of the role. You can probably be a leader without being a manager. Potentially, you can stand up for people, and you can do things where you can lead to an extent without managing. But I'll say it will be very difficult to be a manager without being a leader, for sure.
Okay, so the latest topic brings us back to SEO Mastery Summit in Saigon. So this is a conference for SEO leaders, isn't it?
That is very much. I try and get a lot of stuff into it, so it's not 100% SEO. There is a bunch of business stuff and so on as well, because again, for me, two things. Obviously, we want to do the best SEO conference in the world, which I do believe we have. And the core of that is that often, again, what SEOs want to learn is the small SEO tricks that make them a nitty-gritty tiny bit better. What they need to learn is often more business, more leadership skills and so on. So I try and kind of match those two things pretty well. But fundamentally for me, events, conferences, it's not so much about sitting down learning. For me, those events is about networking, right? So when you're in business, when you're doing business, the value is in networking, right? For me, like I've done, I don't know, 15 events this year. I go and speak a lot, and the value is in connecting with a lot of different people, seeing a lot of viewpoints, building a lot of great relationships. Very often when you go to an event, you just need to meet one person who might be the right connection, or who might know someone, or who might be able to enable you to do something to double your business. And very often, it's one or two people can make a huge difference. So for me, the focus when I'm at any event, not just our own, but when I'm at any event, it's really building network, meeting a lot of people. And some people, when you meet 100 people, I always say, some people are afraid of people. They're like, oh, if I meet people, they will trick me and they will scam me. And my philosophy is very simple. If I meet 100 people, there's probably going to be 10 great ones in between those, right? If I meet 10 people that are great, one or two might screw me over, but that still means 8 or 9 won't, right? And I would rather meet 8 or 9 new great people and progress with that and get scammed once or twice if I need to, rather than not meeting new people, right? So I think one of the most limiting mindsets is fear, right? Like so many people, honestly, it's an excuse more than anything, but so many people use fear as an excuse not to do things or not to move forward. Or the same with business, right? Like when you're looking at lead generation and so on, people are afraid, and it's holding them back. And it's the same when it comes to networking, right? Like any very successful person, doesn't matter if you're talking about Elon Musk or anyone else, their success have been built based on the people they end up surrounding themselves with, right? Every day of the week. And if you think, like, here's the thing, you can sit at home in your basement and spend 10, 20 years working really hard and you can make some money. But you're never going to build a big, great company. You're doing it the hard way. You're not doing it the easy way, right? And if you don't have good networking, there's a limit to how far you will get. Is my experience.
Yeah. From my experience, I can definitely say that the SEO Mastery Summit helps develop mainly networking skills. So I definitely recommend attending, even if for the networking with big names after the the conference. So it's, and the Saigon is really a nice city to visit as well. So as the host of the conference, what unique challenges have you faced organizing it, and how did you overcome them?
So I will leave out the working with Vietnamese bureaucracy. So I'll leave that one out. Yeah, I mean, putting a conference in place is it's a lot of risk. I mean, we were one of the first people who put up a conference after COVID. And reality is we put over 100 grand on the table. And if COVID had come back, like, the hotel was not going to refund us those money, right? So we could potentially have lost a lot of money. And that can happen anytime, right? Like whenever we plan the event now, like we put out 100, 200 or something like that for venues and stuff like that. And reality, if something goes wrong, you're losing money, and you're losing a lot of money, right? Because people obviously businesses like hotels and venues take deposits because they want to make sure they get paid, or they get paid at least a proportion of the money, whatever ended up happening, right? So that there's definitely significant risk in running events, and it's not a particularly profitable business, let's just say it that way. So for me, the reason for running events is definitely the network. It's definitely, there's some personal branding in it, obviously. For me, again, I do a ton of events, and I really love being able to do an event the way I want it, right? So I mean, everyone have different taste, everyone want different things and so on, but I go around the world, I see a lot of events, and it's really, really nice to do an event the way I want an event to be. And that's what we do consistently, right? So yeah, other challenges, obviously making sure speakers arrive. Like what we haven't tried with speakers, message the day before an event that a speaker realized his passport had expired, so he couldn't board the plane. We have seen, we've seen a lot of stuff, right? Always, anytime you plan events, particularly events with 400-500 people, right? There's always a lot of stuff going wrong. There's always a lot of things moving, and the biggest thing is really being able to maneuver around it. All right. So when you've done events for a while, you'll learn to like not make a big issue out of things and just move on. Right. The goal in the end of the day is to give the audience the best possible experience. Right. And I mean, we typically have about 60 to 70% of our audience that come back year after year. So we know that people are very, very happy. Right. Coming to Vietnam, I mean, the majority of our audience come from Australia, Europe, US, right? So they're traveling a long while. But at the same time, that's also part of what makes it so great, because people don't just send all of their employees halfway around the world, right? Like the people who come at our event are the top of the top, right? It's the people who one can afford to fly halfway around the world. It's the people who have big businesses. It's the people you want to connect and network with. So
Yeah, but besides the bureaucracy that you mentioned, that location is pretty amazing, because for me personally, I'm in love with Vietnamese cuisine. So visiting Vietnam was like, yeah, conference is okay, but let me try, the Vietnamese food, made by professionals and the Vietnamese people. But as you mentioned, you want to make it valuable for the visitors. So maybe you can share what are the key elements that make an SEO conference successful and valuable for attendees, besides the location. But I think this is also quite important in terms of point of view, the potential visitors, that location should be worth to see.
yeah, I think there's a few key things to think about. So the simple things, when I think event, the first thing I think is a hub city from a flight standpoint, right? I've been to events where you need to take an extra flight to go from a main airport to this little tiny airport. And the thing is, when you have to add one flight, I know some people don't care about it, but for me, particularly for someone like me going to a lot of events, when you have to add one more flight, that means a lot of people don't want to do it, right? For me, if I take one flight or two flights, or if I take two or three, that's a significant difference, right? So number one thing I always look at is a hub airport. Second thing, so I was very keen on doing it in Asia, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in Saigon and Ho Chi Minh City. And for me, it's my favorite party place in Asia, because for two key reasons. One is you can get around. So there's many big cities in Asia where it's very difficult to get around. So like Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Manila, like getting around the city can be really hard. And very often when I go to events in those cities, sometimes you sit an hour and a half in a taxi trying to go from the venue to a party venue. And, by the time you get there, you just want to go home again. And, that's key, right? So, and by the way, when you come with 400-500 people, it's not that easy to find venues in many places, right? I mean, one thing is it costs a lot of money, but second thing is it's not easy to find them. And one of the core things for us with Saigon is we are very, very keen on finding the right types of venue to enable the best type of networking between people, right? Because reality is, when you have a bunch of SEOs, like they're not always looking for a big disco thing where they can't hear and they can't speak and they can't do anything. They're generally very keen on talking and connecting and networking. So finding good venues that are not too loud, not too quiet, have the right size. We are always keen on rooftops, so we try and make the majority of our venues always rooftop venues. And with those criteria, it's sort of a relatively small area, but luckily in Saigon there's a good few of those very cool venues that we get to use again and again. Well, different venues we use. So that's key. Other things, yeah, I mean, creating an environment for it, right? I think a lot of the time, making sure you have kind, good staff around, making sure people feel welcome. Like as a host, for me, the number one thing is my goal is to say hello to every single attendee, right? So when I host an event with 400 people, like I typically MC our event as well. But even with that, like my goal is to shake hands and say hello to every single attendee, because a lot of the time attendees come both to meet the host, but obviously also to meet other people. But also as a host, I know a lot of the people, right? So when I meet people, like if they're doing a certain thing, well, I know some people that will be great to introduce them to and so on. So for me, a lot of the core task as a host and for the host team itself is really helping people connect. It's helping people feel welcome. It's helping create an environment that is good both for networking and for people feeling good. And one of the key things, like, it might not sound like a big thing, but food. Like one of the things when we last year when we were talking with a venue, I said we wanna serve the best. Like it will be a buffet because you can't make anything custom for 400 people. It will be a buffet, but I want to give people the best buffet lunch that they've ever had. And I think for at least 99% of people, we definitely managed to make that happen, right? So, but simple things like food, like a lot of time, someone like me that spend a ton of time in hotels and so on, like I'm very used to shitty hotel food, right? And just something like food, just taking it up a notch. Again, it's giving people a great experience. It's making people feel good. It's making people, want to be there. And I think that's the most important thing. If, I go to a lot of these huge events where, like Affiliate World is an example, and there's a lot of people connecting, and it feels so much like a business. It's like, how many sponsors can we squeeze into every square meter so that we make a ton of money, right? Like that's the goal. But you don't see any of their staff. You don't see anyone, trying to better things for the people there, and that's the core thing for me, right?
Okay, so what tips do you have for selecting speakers and topics for your conference to ensure they, appeal to a diverse audience? Because maybe you have some advice that would you give to those who are just starting out in conference organizing?
Yeah, one of my big things, again, I go to a lot of events, which means I see a lot of speakers, right? Which means I know a lot of speakers, which means I get to see how a lot of the speakers work. And one of the key things for me is I focus a lot on presentation skills. You sometimes have incredibly smart people who haven't invested the time in learning how to be a good presenter. And the challenge is, if they haven't learned how to be a good presenter, you can be very smart, but if your communication skills are not great, it's often not a great experience for the audience. So I often focus a ton on the ability to communicate. And I think we were one of the first events that, probably the first event in the world of SEO that had a speaker coach. So we were investing money in our speakers to have a coach for them to help them improve their speaking. Because my goal is very simple. I want the presentation to do at our event. I want that to be the best presentation they've ever done, right? That's my goal. And I have a speaking coach with our team because we wanna enable that to happen. So that's a key thing. At the same time, there's also a lot of speakers who are everywhere. So I try and have a good blend between some experienced speakers, but also a lot of speakers that are good speakers, but maybe not so well known. Because again, for a lot of people who go to a lot of conferences, if you see the same 10 speakers every conference you go to with roughly the same story, it's not very exciting. So there's a fair chunk to be said for having different speakers, bringing out new speakers and so on. And I think we've done that relatively successfully. Again, I think a lot of the time people who want to speak often majorly underestimate the risk organizers take from picking people who haven't got speaking experience, right? Like I spent 10 years learning public speaking before I ever stood on a stage professionally, right? And reality is a lot of speakers, they just kind of expect to come in, wave a flag and say, hey, I want to speak, right? With no experience, with no anything. And definitely my number one recommendation to people who do want to speak is go and do some speaker training, right? There's Toastmaster clubs, for example, all over the world. And if you really want to speak, like putting in the effort to becoming a half decent speaker before you start doing it professionally, one, it's going to show off way better. But two, you're also way more likely to actually get picked, right? It's so easy to sit around and say, oh, the organizer always pick the same people. And you're like, well, yeah, because they know they can speak, right? The problem with first breaking in anywhere is that. So, yeah. I think from an organized standpoint, definitely getting around, seeing a lot of speakers is probably the number one thing that enable us to pick a lot of really, really great speakers. And network as well. So as a conference organizer, I talk a ton with other conference organizers, and we exchange a lot of information. When I see that I've been a speaker that I'm considering that I've spoken somewhere else, like I'm gonna connect to the organizer and I'm gonna ask the feedback, right? And sometimes if you didn't do well, I'm probably not gonna pick you, right? Because again, as an organizer, it's our risk. If I have bad speakers, right, that reflect bad on our organization. So we want to have good speakers, which means we want speakers who know how to say things. We want to have speakers that have something to say. And yeah.
I think the key is to find proper ratio between the new speakers, newcomers, and legends. But from my point of view, it's a really great thing to meet a new speaker at the conference. And to be honest, I see this tendency more and more often among organizers who somehow are scouting the newcomers, and I think it's really good thing. So this completely other question, but also related to the conference, is about sponsors. So how do you encourage sponsor to become a big part of your conference?
So again, the first time you do an event, it's pretty hard because they don't know you, they don't know your event, and so on, right? So the first time you do an event, number one thing is network. If you know a bunch of people, that makes life a lot easier. As you run an event multiple times and people see the type of audience that shows up and they see what's happening, right? That makes it easier for them to evaluate what's the value for me as a sponsor to engage here. So I mean, I'm either own or part own like 7 companies now, and we do a bunch of sponsoring at different events, right? And that's very big. It's not always about cheap, right? There's people often make this mistake, but all business is about return of investment, right? So sometimes paying more is attractive if you're getting a huge output, right? But a lot of the time, people have a very difficult time evaluating the value of the events they have, and and getting one. Sometimes they ask way too much for what they have, and sometimes they ask way too little. And there's not really a right or wrong way to do that, right? Like you need to see with the supply and demand what you have and what you're capable of. But particularly for the first event, it can be very, very hard. Right.
Okay, so let's jump to the other topic, maybe somehow related. Given your experience working with companies like Ahrefs or big players like Matt Diggity, how do you leverage this connection to enhance the conference experience?
I don't know if those. I mean, like, good people are always great to have around, right? So obviously our focus, so many conferences constantly try and get bigger and bigger. Our focus as an event is staying relatively small, but consistently increasing the value of our audience and making sure that the audience become bigger and bigger. So we only sell 400 tickets for each of our events. And our goal is to improve the quality of the audience, and we have many great supporters of Matt and Kyle Roof and many of these guys that keep coming back year after year, which is great because that shows me that we're doing very good things. I think Yeah, I think really it's not. I don't look so much at how do you use them to enhance. Like I love asking people for help and support, or I love asking them for advice. So when you know some great people, asking them what's their favorite piece about different conferences is very valuable, right? So yeah, but I think fundamentally, if you do run an event, I think personally the core thing is figuring out what do you want to do, like what is it you want to build, and how is it going to be different from whatever else is around, right? Because there's so many events that just kind of looks the same, right? They kind of just, yeah, you don't see the difference, you don't realize what country you're in, whereas some events have very distinct ways of doing things that differentiate from others, and I think that's really, really important.
Okay, so what advice would you give to someone organizing their first SEO conference based on your experience? Yeah, maybe you have some, one thing that you can share with us.
I mean, honestly, it's a mix of things, right? So it's number one, get some good speakers, because again, if there's no good speakers, it's hard to get audience. So find a way to attract some good speakers. That's probably the most important, right? Because in the end of the day, if you don't have any speakers that anyone knows, it's going to be very hard to sell tickets.
Okay, so maybe tell me, what role does feedback from previous conference, feedback from the audience, from the speakers, play in shaping the content and structure for the every next edition of conference? But because I think that it's quite critical.
Yeah, I would say it's 50-50. So we always spend a lot of time looking at all the feedback we get, and our audience is amazing. It's giving us a lot of feedback. So there's two kinds of feedback. There's the feedback that you've screwed something up, and that happens, right? And that's obviously an opportunity to improve and do better in the next event. So that happens all events. There's feedback on what people would like to see or what they would like to be different. And sometimes there's good things you can learn from. Sometimes there's great suggestion from the audience of how you could do certain things differently. There's also sometimes feedback where people want to see different things, but that's not really what you're trying to do, and therefore you might not want to utilize that. Now you might want to give some of the people who give you feedback on why you do what you're doing, but again, it's just because people suggest something doesn't mean you have to do it. Right? Like again, you have to figure out, it's your event, so you need to figure out what do you want to do, what is it you're trying to achieve, and so on, right? So I think that's an important piece of it for sure.
Okay, so the very last question, besides the Q&A series, how do you see the future of SEO conferences evolving, and how are you preparing SEO Mastery Summit to meet these future needs?
Yeah, I think honestly this year I have seen a ton of new SEO events come up, and probably more than the market can handle, right? So I think there's a lot of people who are running events for the first time who maybe didn't really get what they wanted out of it. And I saw specifically particularly in Europe, there was so many events pretty much on top of each other that was very similar. And honestly, my expectation is some of them probably won't be there next year. I think events in general, again, I'm hoping they will turn a little bit more businessy. I love SEO as a niche. I think SEO is amazing. And again, there's a big difference between you want to be surrounded by other people like yourself, but at the same time, it's important to figure out what are the things to learn, right? And I'm definitely hoping for more sort of business input in more of the events, because at many events you'll see people that aren't SEO nerds, right? You'll see people who run an e-commerce store, they benefit a lot from SEO, but they're not there to learn SEO. They're there to connect with people, and often very little content is valuable for them, right? So I think a little bit more diversification in the direction of business is probably what we're going to see as well. And yeah, honestly, I saw a trend this year for more sort of the live streaming from some events and so on. And I have a feeling that'll disappear as well, because honestly, like the value in events is the physical connection, right? Like the value in events is not spending 20 hours sitting looking at presentation, right? Like, yes, there's some great presentation that you can learn some stuff from, which is amazing, but the highest value output from events is 100% the networking and the connecting with other people.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And that was the last question that we've prepared. And we finish our series of questions. We are waiting for some question from our let's wait a minute for some question. And before we while we will be waiting for the question, tell me, Matt, because Vietnam is one of my favorite countries, to be honest. What do you like most about Vietnam? Is it the food, or the people mentality? Because those two things are amazing, because they are so kind in every situation, in every type of situation during the day. The Vietnamese people are like just too kind for European, and the food as well is amazing. So maybe you have some other things that I need to take a look on.
Yeah, for me, it's honestly a mix of things. Like I've been spending a large proportion of the last 10 plus years in Asia, sort of between Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and so on. And the reason I spend the most time in Vietnam is a mix of it, right? So the food is great. People are great. What I particularly like is that the people are actually more European than most of Asia. So while they're nice, they're also a little bit more driven, a little bit more entrepreneurial. Like I have way more friends that I love hanging out with in Vietnam than I have in like Philippines or Thailand. And I'm sure there's some great people, but just in Vietnam, there's way more people who think more like a Westerner. So I'm not saying we are right or wrong. I'm just saying compared to how I think, compared to the people I love hanging out with the most, I have so many very, very good friends in Vietnam that I haven't found the same sort of local experience in like Thailand and Philippines, right? So that's some other stuff. I think also just as I said, Vietnam is very interesting because they use a high quantity of motorbikes, and what that does is the traffic actually moves. So like when you live in the center of Saigon, for example, which is a city of 10 million people, like I can usually get where I want to be in 15, 20 minutes, right? Like literally anywhere in the city I want to be. And there's not a lot of cities, definitely not a lot of 10 million people cities where that is the case, right? So I think that's, yeah, it's sort of a whole mix of things. But yeah, many areas of Vietnam that I really like and appreciate. Also, lots of areas, Philippines and Thailand and so on. But Vietnam is definitely the sort of top spot for me.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, Matt, I think we've just exhausted the topic because there are no more questions. Once again, it was a big pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Thomas. It was great to have a chat.
Don't forget to subscribe the I Hate SEO newsletter on ihateseo.com and Linkhouse channel on YouTube. I encourage you to follow us and Matt on LinkedIn as well. And see you all soon on further webinars or others materials on our YouTube channel. So let's be in touch. Thank you once again, Matt. Thank you all. See you soon.
Thank you very much.